All right, cool.
Should set up. So you want to do the Sasori versus Deidara?
Yeah, I'm open to that.
Yeah, I saw you were gonna debate Sate on that, and I was like, I'm not letting that happen. I'm gonna snatch this fucking topic. I was like, I'm not letting. For the sake of this debate, do you want to like kind of split it up into like the scaling part and then the hacks, because those two are like kind of almost different.
Yeah, that's fine.
That'll make it a bit easier. So let me just make sure my OBS is good. All right. So do you want to start? I can start. It's whatever.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. Basically, like my starting premise is that like I think that Sasori scales very closely to Sakura, and I think that Deidara like massively overskills that.
Okay.
Right.
So you're gonna leave with that. Yeah. Okay, so that's pretty much contradictory to my premise, because I'm of the premise that Sakura, for one, doesn't scale to Sasori, and Sasori would just simply scale above Deidara via off their statement. So I guess we'll get into that. I obviously the statement. I'm not gonna need to drop that in chat or anything like that, like Sasori.
Yeah, I'm aware.
So pretty.
All right, here, let me find this one scan, and then we can get started. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, here we go. All right, so here's just like a baseline statement by Chiyo. She's basically mentioning how like everything that Sakura does in her kit is basically like extremely strenuous.
Yeah.
And that like her healing and her punching and all that. So I think that like coming into the fight, Sakura had like already healed Kankuro. Like she should be like she should be fatigued, and then like even after this she's like healing Chiyo and bodying the Haruku shell, and then even after this she's still dodging the Iron Sand and putting up like a really good fight against Sasori. Like overall she kind of like adapts as the fight goes on.
Okay. And
then Chiyo comes to state this. Let me grab it. There we go. This is like a statement about how she like overcomes stuff. She states that like Sakura started to read Sasori, like she's reacting to his movement, and she even says that she doesn't need to be there in the fight. Yeah. And that like Sakura should be like relative to Sasori, just like kind of based on this.
Okay, so for one, right? I think the whole like she's healing like before the fight. It's the only issue I have with that is like it's a bit like unquantifiable, like because we would have to like try and gauge her chakra levels to the degree of like how much she's like expended over healing, and we don't know how much time has passed and prior to this fight, so it's a little iffy like point to like kind of come off of like she's already fatigued like in this confrontation. I'd agree. Yeah. So in terms of like what you said that I do agree with, I agree with a couple things. For one, I do agree that Sakura was like reading Sasori. Where I would go with that is that she was reading Sasori in his suppressed state. So she would only really adapt, in my opinion, to a suppressed Sasori. For example, do you agree that or like what? I don't know if your stance on this. Would you agree that like his human puppet body, like when he like takes off his cloak, would be his peak power?
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, so essentially the only thing she would scale to is an unquantifiable version of his suppressed state. And we actually do know he's slowly like unsuppressing himself. He's playing with them. For example, you have verbatim statements from him being like, looks like I'm gonna have to expend a little chakra here. And so he's slowly letting out more of his power, in which she's simply like reading, his fingertips for like the muscle patterns and how he's actually gonna, communicate the puppets. So she's pretty much only like reading him and scaling to a suppressed version of that, which would be more consistent with, the version that Deidara states is stronger than him being in his human puppet form.
Yeah. So I think that like overall, I think that Sakura shows like no anti-feats going later down throughout the fight of like reacting to even like human puppet Sasori, and she even does like a better job of reacting to Sasori than people who even scale below Deidara like later in the series. I can go into that like with like a base starter Shippuden Sasuke just like absolutely blitzing Sakura. I was just like scaling like Sasuke over her, and because she does better to read Sasori's movements than even like base Sasuke.
Well, let me because before we even get into that, I was gonna address something because you talk about how she's reacting to base Sasori, but we actually do know, for example, right? Because you brought up the statement of like how Chiyo's like, oh, she doesn't even need me at this point, but then like pretty much following this, I could drop the whole thing. Like Sasori pretty much says like, I'm gonna need to like expend some chakra. It actually releases an attack which she's not even able like to react to. She gets hit. The only reason she's actually able to do anything is because she actually hit herself with the like antibody or antidote, if you would. So he actually does talk about like him pretty much every time he unsuppresses himself, she's kind of like unable to react in that sense. And
I just think like
go ahead. No, you're good, man. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying like the nature of this specific attack and like Sasori's like overall kit. Like like this specific attack in general, it's kind of like an area effect attack, like that's kind of like almost like undodgeable. So I wouldn't expect Sakura to be able to dodge that, but more so be able to like react to the third Kazekage puppet and like the like even his human body when he goes in with that. Less so like a jutsu like this. I think that would like provide more like evidence to Sakura scaling to him.
Well, when you say she reacts to the human puppet, what are we referring to? Because I know. Go ahead with that. Yeah.
I can grab that. I actually don't have that on hand. But,
are you referring to when she like grabs his like whip thing in his stomach or whatever, like the coil? Is that what we're referring to?
Well, that would help prove relatively, but not exactly. What I was referring to, but let me find the chapters for this specific fight.
Yeah.
It should be chapter like 300.
It's like 270 something. I'm like looking at it. I'm just going through it as well.
Oh, okay, yeah. 276. Okay, yeah, this is when like okay. Already took out Deidara here. So okay.
Yeah.
So here's like okay, like Chiyo's like pretty much dead here. All right, Sasori's now dead. All right, now let me find what I'm referring to here. Oh yeah, it has part to do, like.
I think your audio cut out for a sec. Oh, I don't know. I don't know if you muted yourself. Yeah, just. Can't hear. Oh yeah, just fixed it.
All right, I think I should.
You're good now. You're good. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so I'm talking about like specifically about the feat where he like or Sakura like blows Sasori's body apart. He like builds himself back up.
Well, that was was when she like grabs the pretty much the thing inside.
Yeah, and then right before that, hold on. Okay, never mind. Guess I'm on the wrong chapter.
It's 272 when he shoots it out of his stomach.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I hate waiting for fucking scans, bro. Like that's so like I'm not here for 10 minutes trying to.
Yeah, I agree. I usually have most of my stuff on hand. I don't really. It usually doesn't really get this. All right, yeah. Okay, so. Oh, actually, Sasori seems like pretty. Okay, yeah. So he doesn't actually know at this point that Sakura has grabbed onto his little cable.
Yeah.
So he's like, he's like running away. And he goes to attempt to blitz Chiyo, and then she grabs his rope and throws him back and completely bodies his entire body.
Well, what's interesting about the rope, right, is that all she would do is like grab it off the ground, because we actually do know he has to like plant it, and then it solidifies, and then he's able to kind of like stand on it and like move around with it. So she would just simply grab it off the ground as he's going there, and then she like started pulling it and all that stuff.
Oh, wait, I see. He actually shot the rope at he shoots the rope at Sakura, and then it plants into the ground. I think that honestly here. He's like All right, so like in this whole fight,
Yeah.
here comes Sasori to come blitz Chio, and this is when the rope has just come into the ground. And by the time he arrives at Chio, which he's pretty close, like even in the scan, Sakura has already gone to the rope and managed to pull it back. I think that's like almost like an equal speed feat.
Well, it's a little weird, right? Because we have the rope. It's almost like an unquantifiable like distance away from Sakura, because it's kind of shown that it's like right next to her. It grazes her at like a downward angle. So he's pretty.
Yeah, we can see so.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So we see the rope come down next to Sakura.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So in the time that Sasori's capable of moving into Chio, like Sakura's already picked up the rope and yanked him back and then hit him with even enough force to just like completely body his entire shell.
Well, in terms of the puppets, right? I'm not going to argue for their durability, because it's kind of lackluster, and I don't think that's a fair point. But basically, we have like pretty much the rope point. It's like right next to her, and it's pulling her. We don't know how far across the battlefield. For all we know, he could have gone across like the whole plane by the time she's just chugging in. We don't know like how long like the rope actually is. So it's kind of this iffy point to like completely like scale her off of, and like pretty much like anti-feed him, especially since like pretty much what we have, right? Because we kind of have like, I have this statement where like Sasori scales to like Deidara, and you're pretty much disagreeing with that, like off Sasuke, am I right?
Yeah.
So essentially, right, we kind of have like these like two, interpretations, two narratives of like how like these characters like scale to each other. In which I'm kind of making the claim that Sasori's like slowly unsuppressing himself, and we have all this supporting evidence that he's not completely going all out, and his human puppet form like being the strongest. In which like this small like questionable Sakura pulling the rope and all these like unknown variables, I wouldn't necessarily see it as like the biggest like debunk to like this already established like lore that Sasori would bare minimum need to be like relative to Deidara to actually be even threatening to him in terms of his attack speed and all that. So it's a little bit on the point of like ponderance of evidence. Does this small like questionable like scene with like our varying interpretations, like which one does like the narrative and like the series statements more so support, like which side of it? In which I would say that it would kind of go towards the side where Sasori's like slowly suppressing himself and more scaling to Deidara.
Yeah. See, I think that the narrative between like Sakura and Sasori, like even like the like the narrative shown throughout the show should like imply relativity. Like if we're gonna stay on, we can move past this rope point, but like at the very end, we know that like this rope that hit Sakura, we believe this should be poisoned, and she like it hits her and she winces. And in this, like, I think that in this time of Sasori trying to blitz Chio, her ability to like overcome the pain, grab the rope, pull Sasori back, and just like one shot his body should like even imply relativity. But we can move past that.
Yeah. It's like even like rhetorically speaking, like the whole idea of like the fight was to kind of show like Sasori like wasn't this like heartless being and all that stuff. But yeah, we pretty much have these like different interpretations of like this one small scene. But we'll move on from here. So in terms of like, so pretty much I'm going with the narrative that Sasori would simply scale to Deidara. Do you want to get into the Sasuke stuff? Yeah.
We can get on with the Sasuke stuff now. Do you need me to grab the scan of when like Sakura first shows up at the Orochimaru's hideout and base Sasuke?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Yeah, we've seen all that.
Okay, so I think that like base Sasuke like is capable of moving faster than like Sakura can really perceive and move to react to.
Yeah.
Which is like I don't think that level of speed was really shown throughout the Sasori fight. Like I think the couple attacks that hit her were like this long wide iron sand jutsu, which I don't think is like comparable. And also this is like that was like heavily damaged Sakura. This is like like Sakura who should be like fully rested.
Well,
so I think that
we could argue actually just a real quick because I don't want to. So we could actually argue like that this Sakura could possibly be more fatigued because Naruto actually kind of like grazes her with the four tails like arm, and she's still kind of, the effects are a lot more drawn out. So you could make some implications that even in this sort of confrontation, she's also like not completely 100% because she had this prior injury that was more so like noted to be significant, as like even as they're traveling, she's like, she knows how it's just like it's this issue for her, like even as they're just traveling to the hideout.
Yeah, I think that like mostly with that little notion of the Naruto hitting her, I think that was more of like a narrative for the story in order to like you know, like how Naruto's trying to like suppress the Nine Tails, and this is the moment where he knows like now that I've hurt one of my comrades, I can't keep using it like this. And I think that him damaging her like in that way was kind of to push that notion. And I don't think that this little nick that she like gets from Naruto should be comparable to like multiple times when she was poisoned and should have died. She was stabbed multiple times.
Well, I'm not making the comparison of like, you know,
yeah.
I'm making the pretty much like the assertion, right? Like her coming into like the Sasuke confrontation versus like the Sasori one. She's like more so noted to have like this almost handicap with like the Nine Tails chakra like damaging her. And I agree with the narrative point. It would just, you know, still apply with like this being like an issue for her, like an ongoing point, which something like let me pull it up real quick. Like it's like okay. She even tries healing it, like she completely heals it. It's like effects are still like long lasting. Here, I'll pull it up real quick just so.
Okay, like
yeah, go ahead.
My point right there was just that like her repeatedly bringing up was more to push the narrative, more so her actually being damaged. Like that was my mean.
Well, it could wouldn't you agree? It could be both. She could actually be damaged and push the narrative. Like it doesn't have to be, you know, mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I would agree, but I don't think that like the damage she takes or like the fight or not really, like I don't think that the attack should have caused as much damage or even more to be comparable. I know you're not claiming that it did.
Yeah.
I'm just saying like I don't really think they're that comparable.
Here, I'll pull it up just so we can have some semblance on this. Do you want to continue out with your point, like while I just grab this real quick?
Yeah. Okay. So basically, I made the assertion that like Sasuke blitzed Sakura, and then I was just gonna scale Deidara to a stronger version of Sasuke.
Yeah.
That being like Curse Mark II heavy Sasuke.
Like Orochimaru absorbed, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that that version of Sasuke, who should be relative to Deidara, I can get scans of that if you want, should be like that should definitely be like stronger than like base start of Shippuden Sasuke, who Sakura was not even able to react to.
Yeah,
more or less.
That could be the case because we kind of both are at like a crossroads, right? Because we both kind of have like these own like separate scalings, no separate narratives. Which I find like the scaling that Sasori would simply scale up is actually like supported by a statement from Deidara himself, where like the scaling that like Deidara would like massively scale above Sasori. While you could make the case, it's less supported by the series. And if we're both making these narratives, right, like we both come into contention on points, it would simply fall with like within like which one is more consistent within the context of the series, in which I would argue we actually have a statement for like my narrative pointing it out and like supporting it. So like pretty much wherever we go, like right, whichever point we kind of bounce around on. Like let's say we discuss this, well it could be this, it could be this. At the end of the day, it would still fall back to like the same point in which we both have these differing interpretations, but mine is just simply backed up by a statement saying Deidara, like Sasori stronger than Deidara by Deidara himself. So
yeah, see, yeah. I think that the narrative of like the Akatsuki and like I guess like the world building throughout the story can like support them being relative or Sasori being slightly stronger. But I think like the scaling shown throughout the show, it doesn't really support that. Like even so, like like Deidara is like you know, he makes it longer throughout the show to see more like build up in strength. This is like mainly through Sasuke.
Yeah.
And I think that like his whole encounter with like Kakashi and Naruto versus Sakura and Chiyo. Yeah, I just think that like the fact that Deidara escapes and Sasori doesn't kind of like points to my claim. You know, like the scaling just really isn't consistent with that.
Here's the thing, right? Pretty much at every like crossroad, right? Every crossroad about scaling, you can always make the case of like, well, that could be the case, or like this could be the case. So we're kind of at this like crossroads, and you could make like some narrative argument of like this Akatsuki member like living longer, like, and that's somewhat correlating the strength. I don't think that's necessarily the case here, because we kind of have people like like Kisame, like lasting longer, and like like pain, like kind of have these like varying levels of strength, like Hidan like being like introduced later, despite Hidan generally being considered like one of the weaker members of the Akatsuki, even by his speed, because there's like statements on that. So it's pretty much like this whole like pretty much this whole like debate almost comes down to like who's scaling and who's like interpretations like supported by like feats and statements, because like pretty much the problem with the Deidara stance is like you'd have to interpret the Chiyo stuff a certain way, and we're both interpreting it different ways, in which like mine is backed up with the statement, whereas with the Deidara stance it's it's a lot harder, because like we don't have that statement to kind of like give us a border. It warrants a contradiction which wouldn't entirely be necessary if you're following.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah,
I understand that like throughout, I guess, like narrative between like solely Deidara and Sasori, then like definitely narratively you can make that argument. But as for like Sakura, I think that like the narrative actually really does point to Sakura being relative to Sasori. I think like this is kind of headcanon, but like just like Kishimoto, like he's trying to like blossom Sakura almost, like I guess that's a metaphor with her name, but like I think that like this whole encounter was with Sakura and Sasori was kind of meant for Sakura to fight somebody her level and be able to defeat them. I think that's why there's all these statements from Chiyo about how like amazing Sakura is and how she doesn't even need to be there. Like, while that could really be contradicted, like with the I think that the narrative of just that fight should just like kind of show
that could still very well be the case with her being like weaker than Sasori. Like her just like, you could look at it from like the same way, like, oh, she went from this useless girl who's like not necessarily as strong as Sasori, but very useful and pivotal in like this battle, in which like we do know like Chiyo was like the main like kind of foregoer, and then like Sakura after like studying Sasori a little bit is able to like contend with this suppressed state a little more. So we kind of like that could still very well be the case with her being weaker as well. It wouldn't really like contradict anything. It's just like it's just coming back to like the same point with differing interpretations of like how we like scale these characters, in which the statement, all that stuff. But following that, 'cause I feel like we're kind of like going a little bit around on that point. Like on the scaling, I think we kind of like made it clear on like the Sasori and like Deidara stuff. Like I don't know if there's really anything else in terms of scaling, because pretty much like it's gonna come down to the same thing anyways, like in which like you're gonna make like a narrative point for Sasuke, and I'm just gonna fall back to statement, like pretty much go with like in varying interpretations. So would you want to continue with like going up in the scaling, or what's up to you?
I mean I can go over one more thing. I guess like a I can go over one more thing.
Go for it. Just because I don't want to like obviously like ad nauseum this debate. So go for it, please.
Yeah. I'm just gonna go over like a couple feats that Edo Deidara has.
Sure thing.
All right, so let me start off. Let me grab the scan real quick.
Are you just gonna like refer to him like scaling to like Onoki and like Inoki knowing how?
Well, yeah, and like providing much better feats than Edo Sasori does, because Edo Sasori was actually like kind of bodied by Kankuro.
Well, the interesting thing about like Edo Sasori's Kankuro is like we could actually infer that like he would be weaker because he doesn't have like this immortal puppet body like tricked out with all his jutsu. He just kind of has like this regular Edo Tensei body with like these kind of weaker puppets. Like he doesn't really even have puppets. He has like Sai's brother. So the Kankuro stuff's kind of iffy because like puppet masters in particular, like their main deal is like one, their puppets like are a big deal of their arsenal, and like the puppets jutsu that they actually can't use. So it's a little iffy on that point. And as far as like his Edo body, like I would argue it wouldn't be too necessary because obviously he wouldn't have access to like his actual puppet body, which actually like has jutsu in like the back of his scrolls and is completely coated in his poison and all that stuff. So the Kankuro fight I feel like isn't like a great display because he's kind of like yeah, go ahead.
The thing is, I just think that like this should like scale to his combat speed regardless. Like even if like necessarily his jutsu weren't as good or his hacks really, I think that his combat speed or like the speed at which he fights should still be comparable. Like between Edo Sasori and Alive Sasori, and you could even argue that like his like Edo body should be able to move faster.
Well, let me ask you this: like, wouldn't it make much more sense? Because like, why would it be impossible for like Kankuro to get stronger or get buffed with like this new puppet? Like, what why would that be like?
Well, I do agree that Kankuro definitely got stronger, but I don't think by any means like Kankuro should. He gets like Sasori's puppet body. I'm correct. I'm correct by saying that.
Yeah. He gets like Sasori's like hollowed out puppet body. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that like he should definitely get stronger from that. But I think that Deidara's feats kind of trumped that. Like that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Well, I mean, it would just come back to simply the Sasori scaling up. But in terms of Deidara like scaling to like Onoki, I would just probably like Onoki notes he's like fast and stuff like that. Yeah, it would. In this scan, like it is like a clone that he destroys, and like his like assistants like holding him back or whatever, and stuff like that. Like during the fight, I'm not gonna like argue like that Deidara like scales to Onoki because I actually think that is the case. Like, but I would just simply make the argument that Sasori for one would like scale with him, and it wouldn't even be inconsistent for like Sasori to like scale to like this Kage level either, like based off his third Kazekage lore, if you would, like the strongest Kazekage. So it wouldn't even be inconsistent for these Akatsuki members to like scale to like the Kage level, if you would. It wouldn't really like be any contradiction there, like in terms of their strength or anything like that.
Yeah, I just wanted. Well, you're not really claiming it, but I just wanted to go over like a couple contentions I have with like Sasori really scaling to the third Kazekage.
Oh, sure. Go for it. Well,
I think that like the statements about the Kazekage strength are really based off like almost like his sand. Like the Kage in general, or the Kazekage, sorry, are really what they're based off of. Like their sand is really what defines them.
Yeah.
And here's like a scan of Sasori. He says that or Chiyo states he can use the third Kazekage's own jutsu, so that the Iron Sand. And he says, if you recall, this is what made his name as the most powerful at all. I think that around like the lore of the sand with the Kazekage and the fact that Sasori's really like pushing the Iron Sand.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
I think that like overall his sand is kind of what upscales him above the other Kage, not necessarily his like combat speed or like impressive feats.
Well, I'm just because it's kind of here. I will agree. Like the lore for the Kazekage like kind of stuff could be a little contentious because like they're very vague with it. So the circumstances in which the fight takes, like how the fight happens, what are the circumstances, like can be argued. It doesn't necessarily there's no like real way to say like how these characters scale. You could imply like the third Kazekage's like jutsu, but then like it would get into would his jutsu like scale to him in speed and all that stuff, because we kind of do see like even like the Iron Sand can amp itself in speed. Like do you want me to drop that data book? Like there's actually like a reference in which like it can amp. It's like using like the magnetic like Polaroids or whatever.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so it wouldn't even you could like make those assertions even based on the Iron Sand, but I'm just bringing up like the point in terms of like because of Sasori's lore, it wouldn't be inconsistent for him also to scale to like this Kage level. level. It would really, it wouldn't be, you know. But I'm not really like trying to argue like Sasori versus third Kazekage, because that's like its own like nutshell. It's just
I got you. Like one other thing, I think that like the situation in which he actually killed the Kazekage is really contendable. Like I believe he says it was like difficult, but there's like a couple. That's kind of like a couple things you can get off of that. Yeah, it's kind of funky.
It's very vague. And in terms of that, so in terms of scaling, anything else, or do you want to like move on to like that?
I think I'm good with scaling.
I think I'm good. Yeah, so we can just move on to the hacks pretty much, because I feel like so in terms of hacks, actually, for starters, I feel like Sasori's poison, right? Because we'll like kind of bar the power scaling for a sec, just to kind of like, because a lot of this is like hinged on if these characters are relative. But
almost like equal stats.
Yeah. So we'll kind of like go under the assumption that they kind of are for like this, just for the sake of like discussing it. Like I think just because they're kind of you get what I mean. So for starters, we actually do have like Sasori's for one poison, right? And that is something that Deidara would not have a counter to. And we actually do know, right? The minute the poison hit, it kind of like numbs the effects and stuff like that. So you could imply, right? The minute like poison's introduced into the fight, for one, if Deidara gets hit, it's a big GG, and it's a big issue, because Sasori's pretty much whole arsenal, even actually like the iron sand pellets, like the smallest, it's actually stated, I could pull it up, but like even like the small grains of iron sand have like poison coated on them. So it's a big part of his arsenal, and like even if you could even argue like the smallest scratch would even like end up as a GG for Deidara, whereas Deidara has like these very flashy and big moves, so it seems more so like kind of like whoever kind of hits the other first type of scenario, which I don't know like what your stance on that is, but you can go ahead.
Yeah, well, since we're kind of doing like equal stats for the sake of the argument, I usually think that like Deidara is just like a lot faster. That's kind of like the basis of my argument. But I actually do agree that if the poison or like anything poison related were to hit Deidara, that would pretty much KO him. Like there's really nothing he could do about that.
Yeah.
I mean, like, most of my arguments, like, stem from Deidara being much faster. And I think that, like, if Deidara really gets onto the dragon and kind of, like, sets up almost like Sasuke, I think that that's almost, like, kind of like GG for Sasori, if like there's like an aerial advantage there.
The weird thing about the dragon is that like Toby or Obito is also like kind of putting landmines in the ground, so it's like, would he even like set that up, or would they just both like be firing like large scale attacks at each other? And you could even argue, right, like if their attacks are like relative to one another, Sasori could just simply like amp his attacks further, like with like the magnetic polarity. So if he's already like relative, his attacks would just simply go faster. On the point of poison, you could make that argument. But also a big point I just want to bring up is that I know we kind of like had, I know you would say had some contention with this, but C0 in the fact that it wouldn't or C4, which is the one with the microscopic bombs.
C0.
Yeah, that wouldn't affect Sasori is pretty much what I'm claiming. What's your stance on that?
I kind of take it really depends on the debate, but like argue that I'm sure you believe he doesn't have like a cardiovascular system, like he doesn't have lungs.
Yes. That's kind of where I'd go with it. Yeah.
I'd probably take like the stance that there's no evidence for either side really. Like the only thing we know for sure is that he has a heart.
Yeah.
And box or whatever. So I think that like you could argue that like the heart implies he has to pump blood places. You could argue like.
Well, here's the interesting thing, right? Because I kind of like, I've heard a couple like discussions on this. Like it's not outlandish, for example, in Naruto for these people to almost imprint their DNA on certain like objects or seals. Like you kind of see that with Sasori, and like you can kind of get an example of this. For example, like the Otsutsuki clan kind of does this with their like marks. Like they'll imprint their entire like genetic code off a simple seal. So it's not even unheard of in like the context of the series for a simple seal to like warrant an entire genetic code, if you would, which is kind of why I lean towards like it's entirely plausible that he doesn't have like all these functioning organs, but you know, his still like lifeless like body, like mind and all that is still like present within the heart, because it's just within like the seals and stuff like that, it's kind of like questionable. It's just like we've kind of seen before, like a full like body isn't necessarily required, if you kind of get where I'm coming from.
Yeah. I agree. I think it's like kind of weird that he would take his lungs out, you know, like I really don't have like that much of a stance on it, really.
Yeah. Okay, and I was just because it was something to bring up, because like a lot of people like bring in like C0, like what's Sasori gonna do against the microscopic bomb?
Yeah, that actually wasn't really part of my argument. You know, like the attack he does against Sasuke when Sasuke's in Curse Mark 2, Sasuke like makes an attempt to jump at him, and he like he kind of like catches him with some bombs, or almost like he does against like Gaara.
Yeah.
Like I don't think that there's really a need for Deidara to go for any like C0 or blow himself up or anything like that.
Yeah. Just the I feel like it was something that I just wanted to address, like in terms of the hacks.
Yeah.
Someone's gonna bring it up, and it's always like that. So I feel like, and, I guess you might somewhat agree with this. Like these are two kind of like ranged fighters in which they both don't necessarily even need to come close to each other. So it's kind of a matter of again, like who kind of faster, and we kind of went into the power scaling sense, and pretty much I guess because we're kind of like coming to the conclusion of like this debate, I guess it just kind of really depends on like who you would argue, because I'm making the claim like pretty much Sasori's relative off the statement, you're making the claim Deidara is superior off his feats with Sasuke. So do you want to just jump to conclusions, or was there any?
Yeah, that's cool.
All right, you want to go first, or I can go first?
You can head off.
All right. So I feel like I won because I feel like I was adequately able to prove that we have this statement as a basis, and obviously feats are greater than statements, but this statement really shouldn't warrant any contradiction, because there's no real anti-feats, and we kind of dabbled into the Sakura, the tangle her with Sasori, in which I made the narrative points kind of talk about how he's suppressed in these encounters, and we pretty much have these like varying interpretations of like when she grabs the rod and stuff like that. So it pretty much comes down to like what's really supported more by the series, in which pretty much on every point we're gonna have a varying interpretation, in which it would always fall back to which one's more consistent, in which I would point to the statement. Going on to the hacks, pretty much it's very predicated on the speed point, in which these are two very big fighters who, for example, if Sasori hits, Deidara with his like sand, obviously it's an instant GG. You could make the case that Deidara would one-shot Sasori off his bombs. Obviously, decide which one's more likely, but I made the case that Sasori, being able to amp his own attacks the speed of his own attacks, like should be able to like hit Deidara more so than Deidara should be able to hit him. C0, obviously, contentious, no lungs, if the fight even gets to there, which it generally probably wouldn't. But I'll hand it off to you, man. That's pretty much my conclusion.
All right, I'll go ahead and conclude. So I think that like when we started off the debate, we kind of started on like the Sakura point, whether Sakura was really relative to Sasori or not, and I think that like the real narrative of the fight really kind of points to Sakura being relative to Sasori, and like this through like the Chio state shell, and she like blows up his body.
Oh, you cut out for a second. You should probably repeat that last point.
Oh, sorry. Where did I cut off?
It was like Chio something, just to like repeat it so you get
the Chio statement. Yeah. So I think that like the narrative is like consistent with the Chio statement, and how Sakura was capable of doing like a lot to Sasori, and I think that like his defeat in the end versus Deidara escaping kind of like points to my argument. And then I think when we went on to like Sasuke, I think that there was like the whole thing with Sasuke and Sakura, I think that whole thing is pretty consistent with Sasuke being much above, and then even a stronger version of Sasuke being pretty relative to Deidara. So I think like the scaling part versus the narrative part is like a big thing. So I think like the scaling, if you just look at it from pure scaling, Deidara would definitely overscale, but you could look at the narrative between the two, and you could definitely make the argument that based off the statement and the narrative that they'd be relative, or Sasori slightly stronger. But I think that is kind of contentious with the narrative through the Chio and Sakura versus Sasori. And then we kind of got into hacks, and we kind of just discussed that. But I basically think that like with speed and strength, Deidara could pretty much do whatever he wants to Sasori without getting hit and just like win the fight.
All right, man. GG, good debate, man.
Yeah, GG's.
All right, we're gonna comment who you thought won. This was good stuff. I enjoyed this. So I'll just stop the recording now because we could just vibe out.